Community Wealth Call for June 2023. My name is Nick Emerson, real estate broker and CEO of the Emerson Group, Real Estate Wealth Advisors, where we specialize in helping real estate property owners with their investments in building, maintaining, and passing on generational wealth in using the 1031 exchange strategy. So I'm excited about today's call because we're going to get into some more niche 1031 exchange products. So rather than talking about your typical brick and mortar reinvestment option, I'm joined here with Adam Nishikawa with Exchange Resources, and we're going to be talking about some of the more niche products that are available to you, both in a 1031 exchange, but also for a standard investment as well. This isn't just exclusive to reinvestment. Just know this is options that you can consider for both points of view. So without further ado, Adam, welcome to the call. Thanks for your commitment of time today to make the Emerson Group smarter.
Thank you, Nick, for having me. Happy to be here.
So let's get right into it. Adam, you're here locally in San Diego. You've been doing it for 6 years. You've overseen, hundreds of 1031 exchange transactions. But before we get into kind of the nitty gritty of the niche stuff, let's just quickly recap some of the basic components of the 1031 exchange. So Adam, what is a 1031 exchange and what is like kind?
Yeah, of course. I know most of these investors are pretty savvy, so I'll go through this quickly. But a 1031 exchange is essentially a piece of the tax code. It's a transaction which allows an investor to defer the payment of their capital gains tax as long as they're exchanging real property for a like-kind real property of equal or greater value. So the biggest thing that I pull from this definition, and it's probably one of the most common questions we get, is what does like-kind mean? Investors reach out with a condo that they're selling and they're saying, hey, do I have to buy another condo? And fortunately, I get to deliver the good news that it is for qualified use of the property for investment or business purposes. So it could be any type of real property. So that's kind of really opens up the options for investors and kind of helps them plan for what could potentially be a 1031 exchange option.
And that's a great point because let's face it, not everyone's out and about doing 1031 exchanges every week. So a lot of people don't realize, hey, when I'm considering what are my options, it's not just detached for detached, right? There's so many options in today's market of what you can reinvest into or how you can use the 1031 exchange. So glad we're touching on that point. Now, what is kind of defined as real property? I think this is important for people to understand, right, Adam, because this is kind of the basis for how the different niche products are set up with fractional ownership, tenancy in common, right? Some of these details matter.
Yeah, I'm really glad you added this slide because defining what is qualified for a 1031 exchange is so important just for the investor's planning purposes. I can't tell you how many times I've had clients call me. They thought they could buy a certain investment with their 1031 exchange funds. Maybe they've even been planning for this for months or even years, and they get down to the wire, ready for the transaction, and we have to tell them, please go review this with your CPA. We don't think it's going to be eligible for a 1031 exchange. So when you're defining qualified property for an exchange, it is for real property held for productive use in a trade or business. And real property, funny enough, even though the 1031 exchange is a federal law, real property is defined under state law for the real property for the purposes of a 1031 exchange. So what is real property in one state may not be considered real property in another state. So it's really important that the investor understands, hey, this may be real property here, but we need to make sure we do a dive into that other state that you're exchanging into or exchanging out of and finding out, was that also real property? It's really important. And it includes everything. It includes land, improvements made to the land, natural resources directly above or below the land. It even includes certain leasehold interests and easements. So it's pretty broad as what is considered real property.
This was a really good point that I'm glad we covered because this was something I didn't even think about, right? We're on such a national scale now. We forget sometimes that there can be different state barriers that may preclude options in a certain state. And that might be why we don't see certain fractional ownership or tenant in common things offered from certain states, right? You're typically seeing them in a very consistent manner coming from like Texas, right? Where that makes more sense now. So I'm glad we broke that down. So, and I just wanted to quickly touch base on the timelines, right? It's 45 days after you close escrow, you must identify, excuse me. So in other words, you sell your property, you close it today, tomorrow's day one, you have 45 days to identify, in most cases, 3 properties or up to 200% of the gross sale of your property. But I also, again, remind people and always harp on this, that we start this conversation and planning months in advance. So we've already, talked to Adam, we've already talked about what are the options we want to consider, what makes the most sense for what we're trying to accomplish, right? Wealth, income, simplicity. And so 45 days and 180 days to close. Most times, I think Adam can agree, when you have a plan, people are nowhere close to 180 days from the closing date, right? Another thing I wanted to mention too is we always talk about what qualifies for an exchange, if it's got to be equal or greater value. That's not to say that you can't do a partial exchange. So just a reminder, you can buy at a lesser value. Just know you're going to pay boot or taxes on the delta or the difference between the price you sell it for and the lower price that you buy the new property for. So now let's get into, now that we've gotten through the basics and the fundamentals on that side, and just kind of quickly, Adam, touch base on what doesn't qualify, right? I know there was some change in 2018 of some of the more or less frequent items that might be included in an exchange.
Yeah, personal property, things that are not part of the actual real property cannot be exchanged. So machinery, equipment, vehicles, etc. And then of course your primary residence, you received the 121 exclusion for primary residences. So you cannot 1031 exchange those. So
I can't keep holding on to these baseball cards, thinking I might be able to use them as part of my 1031 exchange.
Maybe with some advanced planning, and if you plan on renting it out,
okay,
you might be able to convert it.
Maybe I can build a house with the cards, and then I can.
Yes.
Perfect. All right, cool. So let's get into it, Adam. Here's just a quick visual of some of the examples of lesser known real property or options that you might be able to consider. Is there any one from this graph, Adam, that you would say is a more prevalent conversation, or maybe one that has become more of a conversation than others?
Definitely. Over time and with the changes in the market, when people are chasing certain returns and they're looking at, what are my other options besides, this 7% mortgage on my investment property, they might be looking at oil and gas rights. We definitely see those more often on this list, as well as cell towers. With 5G, you've got 4G, LTE, all of these different cell towers and digital services. And they obviously need these cell towers in abundance to be able to operate their business models. As well as, we definitely see manufactured homes come up quite a bit. And, there's a lot, this is something that I think a lot of people don't realize they can exchange into,
Absolutely. No, I think that's why there was a lot of motivation behind wanting to have this conversation with you, is because we just don't know what we don't know. And a client that I've been talking to through this is helped motivate this conversation because he wanted to learn more about some of these more niche products. So let's kind of get more into some of the details around some of these products. So Adam, I'll let you take it from here, man.
Yeah, of course. So like we were mentioning with the definitions of real property, it's so important that the structure, just because it's an oil and gas right, doesn't mean it's necessarily eligible for a 1031 exchange. And that really, fortunately, that definition and that outline that we gave earlier can really be copied to any of these entities and any of these alternative investments. So you can kind of take a look around, and all of these are potential options as long as they're structured correctly. So highlighting these 3 common options, you've got oil, gas, and mineral rights, a working interest and a royalty interest are qualified for a 1031 exchange, but production payments are not. And a lot of that has to do with that being a long-term investment. Is it a long-term investment? And of course, under the 1031 exchange definition, that means at least 24 months in most situations. So they want to know, is this just a short-term lease or is this a long-term investment? And so they're going to look at how the structure of your ownership in that asset is set up. So for oil and gas rights, it's a working interest and a royalty interest. For cell towers, it's a long-term lease or a perpetual easement. A long-term lease, that 30 plus year term is actually pretty broad. That's actually 30 years in total. So that means that if you have a 20-year lease with 2 options to extend for 5 years each, that would also reach that 30-year minimum. So options to extend do qualify towards that long-term lease qualification. And then of course, perpetual easement. So they don't want this to be something that's just there temporarily. They want this to be the ownership is real property. So short-term leases would not qualify. And it's pretty easy to get these structured in a 1031 exchange eligible way. You just want to make sure when you're doing an exchange, you're buying from somebody who is letting you sell it in this manner, because you don't want anything that's going to end up being short-term. Mobile homes.
I was going to say, this is one of the things we talked about when we were preparing for this call, right? Was that my question was kind of like, well, there's advisors that will package and be a sale rep for this product, right? Or products. And my question was, well, aren't they the ones in control of all this information? Like, aren't they the ones who are supposed to be making sure that it's eligible ownership, that it's got all these things? And to your point, your response was, well, of course, yes, they are, but that doesn't mean they will. Right. So you still have to know some of this information, or just make sure that you're in alignment with the right network, which is why you're on this call with myself and Adam.
Yeah, of course. It's definitely something that as a team, we can help the investor through this process, because it really is a team effort. It's talking to the CPA, finding out what they need to do to check all the boxes there, talking to your advisors to make sure they're reading through these contracts and making sure these are good investments and qualified investments. You know, it's just like any industry. You know, there's good actors and there's bad actors, and you just need to surround yourself with people that can help you weed through all of those different deals. Because I've seen some of these deals structured and the cash flow is insane. And then you get down into it and then you realize, oh my gosh, this is on a year by year basis, and they could decide to leave at any moment. And there's all this risk that could be present in certain contracts. That's why it's so good to have a team to help you weed through all of that.
Great point. I think that's also why we should be looking through all these different vehicles as a lens of, what are we trying to accomplish big picture, right? Is it, we want more time? We want a more passive, we want a more active. What do we want? And then choosing the vehicle through that. So these are great options, but we're starting with what is the basic needs of how you want it to perform, and then maybe making some of these recommendations depending on what your tolerance is or what you believe is going to serve you in the long term.
Exactly. And one example, just to cap off this page, that those tax advantages for oil, gas, and mineral rights. For oil and gas rights specifically, there's 2 really interesting tax breaks that you get that you don't get for any other investment vehicle. And that's percentage depletion and cost depletion. Percentage depletion is 15% of your gross revenue is excluded from taxation through through oil and gas rights. So that's a huge benefit. And it's a great benefit for small investors. And what I mean by small investment is it's only for small companies and small investors that are producing less than 50,000 barrels per day. So that's it's a cool benefit for the small guy. And I think one of the things that I love about we're an independent qualified intermediary, and I love just helping the small guy win, you know, because they're competing against BlackRock and all these big companies, and I just love helping the small guy win. And that's one of those tax advantages that I found really unique for the oil and gas rights.
That's huge. I mean, comparing this opportunity to another opportunity, in essence, the other one would have to be 15% better from a tax saving standpoint, right? Because that would be money you'd otherwise already be paying out potentially to your state or the federal government. So, and also too, maybe sometimes these are being made because it's more of a tax hedge than it is income. So another point I wanted to mention is some of these things aren't just used because you want a certain return or a certain income. Some are because, hey, I need to just offset the income that is already being generated, right? And that's a win in itself. So
Yeah, some of these definitely have a lot of tax write-offs as well. So like if you have some capital gain loss you need to offset, these can be great options for that.
and of course, Adam or I are not certified public accountants. So of course, speak to your own CPA or financial advisor on some of this information as needed. So what are some of the other 1031 exchange options, Adam?
Perfect. So I really wanted to talk about three options that I think are the most common. You've got ironically called tenants in common. This has been around for so many years. People call them TICs. So that's one option. You've got the Delaware Statutory Trust, something that has been roaring in popularity in the last 6 years since I started this business. And then the UPREIT, something that I get the question all the time, can I exchange directly into a REIT? And I'm like, no, you can't, but there is a process to where that conversion could be done. And so these are definitely, I would say, the three most common ways to buy fractionally owned real estate.
Perfect. Well, let's break these down into a little bit more detail then.
Perfect. So tenants in common, it really is a way for multiple individuals or entities to own a fractional interest in real estate, and they don't have any minimums. You do not have to be an accredited investor. You do have a lot of control with these, meaning if you've got 4 other investors, you all have to agree to do anything with this type of investment, which some people might say is a good thing or a bad thing, depending. Diversification, it's a great way to diversify. And a lot of my mom and pop investors, this is the only way that they can sort of get access to larger properties. Maybe they don't have the cash or the ability to qualify for some of these larger investments on their own. But they have a few friends, and those friends can help them get to where they want to be. So it's a shared ownership.
So you would see tenants in common most frequently used, like within your clients. What's the most common setup you see?
I see a lot of family and friends setups for tenants in common, and a lot of just investors that they're sort of new at investing, and maybe they don't want the full liability of a property. So they want to be partnered with somebody that they might have more expertise. I've got guys that are industrial guys that partner with multifamily guys to do the multifamily deals. So it helps them kind of mitigate that experience hedge. So I see a lot of different structures, but it is capped, I believe, at 35 investors. So it's definitely for a smaller group of investors than for a larger group.
And it's also a good example of why tenants in common is not used for a lot of these larger structures where you have 500 investors, 1,000 investors, right? Because there's that cutoff there. Okay. Anything else we didn't touch on tenants in common?
Key for 1031 exchanges, tenants in common is excellent when you liquidate, because each investor can take their percentage that they own and exchange completely separately. So that means they don't have to keep with the investors that they're with currently, which would be the case if it was, say, a general partnership or some sort of separate tax ID number.
That's a great point. So in other words, they don't have to all say, all right, well, we're all going to buy this apartment building next. That's what we have to do.
Right. And we all have partners that maybe you don't get along with anymore. And it's a great way to have an exit strategy out of that.
Great way to have a dissolution agreement that you're both willing to see forward, for sure.
Exactly.
All right, cool. The Delaware Statutory Trust. This has been, as you mentioned, Adam, a bigger topic we've been talking more about, and it's certainly become a lot more prevalent. A lot more companies are offering it. So tell us a little more about the Delaware Statutory Trust.
Before I dive into this, I wanted to ask you, actually, what is the prevalence that you've seen clients come to you and ask about this, or even the prevalence in the market in the last 5 years? Just out of curiosity.
Absolutely. I mean, the DST is really a great avenue for people that want to step away from the active investment role and really transition to a passive role, right? They're willing to let go of control of the asset and let a team of professionals, right, take over that burden. So really
Right.
relieving themselves of management burden, but also it's a form of a state tool, really. And what I mean by that is owners are able to take a portfolio of assets, consolidate them into essentially a liquid pool, right, of ownership. And therefore, when they pass on to their heirs, the heirs essentially can take their portion of it, right? They still get the step up in basis, and then they can choose to reinvest it into or pay the taxes and take the money. So it takes away from a lot of the issues people run into when they've got kids. And let's face it, everyone is unique to themselves. Some are already well off. They don't care about rental property. Some don't want to be a landlord. Others just want to move into the property because they want free rent. So it's all different, right?
Right.
That's, to me, really the DST it's for someone who understands that, look, I'm not looking for the top of the market returns. That's no longer where I'm at in my journey, right? In building wealth. We've done well, and we're looking to really take on a more passive role. Or, I mean, there's also other reasons why people would do a DST structure. The nice thing about it is typically in a DST structure, there's a non-recourse loan that gets paired with the equity. So you don't have to worry about, if you're already retired, how do I reinvest into this asset for 2 million and I need a loan for 1 million when I can't qualify, so to speak. So a lot of reasons, right? As you can see, why someone would want to use a DST, and that's some of the more common conversations that I have and help people with that are looking to utilize something that's more of a passive structure.
Yeah, it's amazing you know all that, because I talk to a lot of agents, and this is something that, not a lot of agents know about it, and it's an excellent solution for the right investor, right? You're helping coach them through the 1031 exchange, or maybe just looking for something passive. And people don't realize, like, this option, there's no capital calls, which I'll point out. In a tenants in common deal, they could technically call capital from every single person that's an owner in that building. There's low minimum investments. So if you, Nick, find your client, let's just say they sold something for $1 million and they found the perfect property, it was 800,000, they can put the rest of that money into a DST so they don't have to pay taxes on it. And they'll receive a monthly cash flow on that money. And it sort of solves that problem with having boot left over in the transaction. And I think one of the things that my investors have locked in their mind is, I need to find something equal to or greater. And they might miss out on some good opportunities that might be just below what they thought was equal to. And
they've got their blinders on, and I can only look at 1 million or more. And to your point, in some cases you need to open that up. And I think that's what we appreciate about this conversation, is that there's so many ways you can put together a great solution within the 1031 umbrella. And there's so many different options depending on what you're trying to accomplish and where you're at kind of in the active passive spectrum as well.
Oh yeah. And the low minimum investment's nice. I mean, typically it's $100,000. And just to put it in perspective of how popular the Delaware Statutory Trust has gotten, when I first started, even only 6 years ago, and before this, I was in commercial real estate, but I still hadn't even heard of the DST at this point. And the industry was only a few $1 billion large. Like, it was not a big industry. And now it's tens of billions of dollars. It's grown exponentially, if not hundreds of billions. It's massive. And so for a lot of investors, it's something that just knowing it's there will bring them a lot of confidence to go into a 1031 exchange, knowing they've got this backup if they need it. They're not going to have to pay taxes if they plan this and structure this correctly. So,
and that small term, just knowing that they can use it, is huge.
Yeah.
You already have enough right on your mind of what you need to do, how you need to do it, what time you need to do it. So knowing you have a backup option really helps relieve that stress as far as not knowing what's going to happen, so to speak. The last thing I'll say on the DST, though, is that the only quote unquote con I might mention, if a pro and con comparison, would be you do need to be an accredited investor, which means you have to have a net worth of $1 million or greater that excludes your primary residence. Or if not exceeding 1 million in net worth, you could also qualify as a credit investor with your annual income exceeding $250,000 in gross income. So anything else we didn't touch on this slide, Adam? You think we're good?
I think we're good.
I think we did pretty well on that one.
Yeah.
Okay, now that we did well on that one, I'm just going to drop this on Adam and take a step back because we've got a lot of information going on here. So Adam, before you dive into this and dissect it, I just want to reassure everyone that's the purpose of having myself and Adam as partners, so that if you want to go through this in more detail, rehash out exactly how this works, or maybe understand through the lens of your situation, that's the purpose of doing a follow-up call or scheduling some time to meet and go through this with Adam. So there's the disclaimer. Adam, I'll let you take it from there.
Perfect. Well, everyone, this is known as what is called an UPREIT. It is a real estate investment trust solution for a 1031 exchange. It is actually a combination of a 1031 exchange and a 721 exchange. So it's done through several steps. And just to simplify this in the simplest way possible, if you have a real estate investment trust and it identifies a property to be purchased, it will drop that property out of the trust and into a, let's say, for example, a tenants in common or a DST property. You, as the 1031 exchanger, would exchange into that property, which would then be held for a period of 24 months, which of course is one of the requirements for the 1031 exchange to validate it. And then that property would be absorbed via a 721 exchange and converted into stock into the REIT. So it's a, I would say, a final solution for the investor who wants to have a very liquid ownership of real estate, and especially when it comes to planning for your heirs. So I'll be honest, this process is done by less than 1% of our investors. And it's really for that investor that is completely done with all of their ownership and knows that when they pass away, they want a very liquid asset that can be sold by their heirs. So the biggest difference between this process and, let's just say, a DST is if you pass away mid-cycle in a DST, your heirs have to wait for that DST to liquidate. And that could be any certain amount of time, right? So it can't be immediately sold, potentially for a huge discount, but it can't be immediately sold by the heirs, whereas an UPREIT could be liquidated the next day. So they would receive that step up in basis, all of those taxes die with you, and they're able to go ahead and sell those shares immediately. So I would say
that you think that, I mean, it sounds like a phenomenal way to pass on your wealth to your heirs with really no strings attached in some sense. Why is it that only 1% use it, do you think? It's just because they think it's too complicated?
Well, the nice thing about the Delaware Statutory Trust is if once it goes full cycle, you can exchange back out into something else, because even if your heirs inherit that and
hold on, let's just stop for a minute and make sure everyone understands what Adam just said, because that is huge. You can pull the money out of the DST after it's been sold, and instead of investing it back into a DST, you can actually pull it back out into brick and mortar. So in other words, your kids or the people that inherit, right, the assets or the fund could pull it out of the DST and then go buy a brick and mortar again of their liking. That's huge, because that's not a given for all structures.
Exactly. So that's the downfall of the UPREIT. This is a final solution. Once you've done this, as soon as you sell any of this stock, you have to pay the taxes at that point. So it's definitely something that I'm going to be 100% honest. The average age that I've done this for was 80 to maybe 96. I did it for a 96-year-old gentleman who knew, you know what, I want something liquid for my heirs. I got 4 kids, and this is what we did for him. So it's.
You mean, wait, he didn't leave a mess for his kids?
Yeah.
Wow. Hey, kudos to him. We appreciate him.
Yeah. Whereas, I've had some older gentlemen that they wanted their kids to have that real property to manage and own when they pass away. And they opted for the tenants in common route because they could buy all these different ownerships with tenants in common and just leave one for each of their kids. So they felt like that was an easy way to leave just a very clean estate plan for their kids. So they're not fighting over whether they want to sell dad's only large investment property. They could, opt to just divide it amongst the kids and make it a lot simpler.
I think what's awesome about this too is that people are having conversations about helping their kids out beforehand.
Yeah.
Who would not? You've done everything right to get to this point to be able to pass on wealth to your kids. And if you could see that while you're still alive, why would you not want to see the benefit of that? So not to get too deep into that category, but a reason why I'm passionate about these topics is because there's so many ways when you have the education and the network and the people to help you, that you can build wealth, pass it on, and continue to do great things generation to generation in your family. So after the UPREIT and knowing that only 1% use it, that means for every 10 of you who watch, only one of you will be pulling back the re-record to watch what Adam said 10 times to figure out what step 1 through 4 is for the UPREIT. So thank you, Adam, for that.
Yeah, super useful knowledge, but honestly, for the right person, you never know.
For the right person, if you're even considering it, just call Adam and don't try to get brain damage here. So, Adam, thank you so much for your commitment of time on today's call. This is a QR code that has Adam's information. Please capture it, save his information to your phone. That way you can reach out to him with any questions you have or schedule an appointment if there's any questions you have from this. Adam, anything that you want to add?
Just a thank you for having me on here. I love doing this. I love to be a resource. If you have any clients, I'm happy to come and meet with anyone that's watching this. Meet with me, meet with Nick, and let's talk about these options because we really just want to be a resource for you.
Awesome. And speaking of resources from the Emerson Group side of things, just a quick reminder of how we can help with free asset performance tests. So basically understand what's the performance of your current investment relative to market opportunities, a free rental property market analysis. So same thing as far as understanding what am I currently getting for rent compared to the market. And then if you're interested in just accessing all these awesome calls that we're putting together for you every month, you can do that here at the bottom link for past and register for upcoming calls. So again, thank you, Adam, for your time. And we trust that you as the Emerson Group have gotten a lot of good information from here. Have an awesome, wealthy rest of your June. And happy Independence Day and 4th of July to you and your families. Thank you, guys.